All right. Well, good morning, everybody. All right. We are still in Hebrews and previously in Hebrews. I know this is your old favorite part. Like, wow, what did we miss in the show before? Previously in Hebrews, chapter 1, verses 1 through 4 is just introducing Jesus. All right. Telling us who Jesus is. The whole book is actually answering the question, who is Jesus of Nazareth? Now, second one, Jesus is the Messiah, the Son, the King. So in chapter 1, verse 5 through 13, the writer is talking about the Messiah being the Son. The Son was always equated with the King in Jewish thought, especially around this time. So when they thought of the Messiah, they thought of the King who was going to come and save them from Rome. Then in the third section, chapter 4, verse 14 through 7:28, he talks about the Messiah being the high priest. Jesus is the high priest. And so he is not only king, he is also high priest, which was a little different than what people thought of at that time, especially since a king would be from the tribe of Judah, a priest would be from the tribe of Levi. You really couldn't combine the two. But he goes through Melchizedek then and says, yes, Jesus is the priest. So we covered that. And then in the fourth section, Jesus is the sacrifice for the new covenant. And this is where he's really drawing them toward Jesus as the sacrifice for the new covenant. That started in chapter 8, verse 1, and went through chapter 10, verse 18. And we talked about how with the old covenant, everything was exterior. The blood was sprinkled on people on the outside, it's sprinkled on the tabernacle on the outside. Whereas with the new covenant, Jesus had us take this cup, this blood, drink this cup. It is an internal thing. So God is working on us on the inside with the new covenant through the blood of Jesus. And then finally, we're into persevere in faith. That's where we are right now. Started in chapter 10, verse 19. We'll go all the way through chapter 12, verse 29. We are starting chapter 11 today, which is probably the best known portion of Hebrews, okay? The Hall of Faith. If you do not have a handout, please get one. Okay, so far, this is just a preview for chapter 11, how it's supposed to look. Within the Hebrew scriptures, okay, the Old Testament, the writer keeps pointing back there to the Old Covenant, the prophecies of the Messiah, the Melchizedek event, the priest's sacrifices and tabernacle. He is showing that all of these things, all of these events, the ratification of the Old Covenant, the Messianic prophecies, Melchizedek appearing to Abraham and interacting with Abraham, the Messiah being priest, the priest, the sacrifices, and the tabernacle that God established in Moses are all pointing towards something that is future. These events point to an event in the future, which is the new covenant, where the Messiah is a king, he is a priest, and he is the sacrifice for the new covenant, which we find in Jesus. So we have these events pointing to the new events. So, chapter 11, verse 1. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. Okay, verse 1 is probably the most quoted part of Hebrews. And it's probably the most misunderstood or misappropriated part of Hebrews. The King James Version is the one most people know. It's the one I learned. I'm reading from the NIV. So, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. You have your handouts there, and this chart is on those handouts. So what people tend to say is that faith is blind. It's the evidence of things not seen. In other words, you don't have any evidence for what's coming. You just jump out and do it. It's the substance of things hoped for. You don't have any evidence for it. You just go and do it. That's what skeptics hold to as blind faith, and they criticize Christians for having this. And there are some Christians who take this and say, if you have faith, you don't need evidence. And most of those people are going against, say, apologetics, where you are laying out evidence. Like I'm going to, on April 6th, lay out evidence for why Christianity is true, the resurrection is true. They push that aside. But that is not the biblical view of faith. And we're going to see that through chapter 11. The biblical view of faith is you have a past experience with God. That is the substance and evidence that you have. And you take that substance and evidence, and then when a future experience is shown, you move towards that future experience. It is the things hoped for and not seen. Right? And as we go through this chapter, we'll see that. So faith, I apologize, on your sheets, this phrase is a little different. You might want to write it down. Faith is the expectation of a future experience. The expectation of a future experience is based on past experience. So in other words, you have an experience with God, and then you have an expectation of a future experience with God. Going back to the slide before, the covenant, the prophecies of the Messiah, these were experiences with God that Israel had. And they were pointing toward the future experience that they would have with the real Messiah, Jesus. All right? And verse 2, this is what the ancients were commended for. When they had an experience with God, they were commended for moving forward beyond that experience to the new experience God was leading them to. Okay, now we hit the section by faith. And every single time it's by faith, this person did this. By faith, this person did this. So, verse 3, by faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. So by faith, we understand that God created everything. But is that just a blind faith? No, for one thing, we have Genesis that tells us God created everything. But then if you turn to Romans 1, Romans 1, verse 20, the Apostle Paul says, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. In other words, when God created everything, he put a part of himself, his characteristics, into what we see. We understand that God is powerful. We understand God is creative. We understand that God is loving because he is providing for us through creation. So our past experience, we know God created just because of Genesis, but we also know from evidence of creation. And that leads us to believe that God created everything. As Genesis said, out of nothing. Okay. Verse 4. By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks even though he is dead. Okay, hopefully you've noticed by now that your sheets are exactly what's on the screen. So I didn't want anybody to get carpal tunnel trying to write all this stuff down this morning. Okay. So by faith, Abel. What kind of experiences did Abel have or may have had that led him to bring a good sacrifice to God? He didn't just wake up one day and say, oh, this is a good sacrifice. Something had to spur him on towards that. So Adam and Eve were his parents, and I'm sure he heard about how Adam and Eve interacted with God. You find that in Genesis 3. God may have spoken to Abel, and the reason I say that is because later on, God speaks directly to Cain. So if God spoke directly to Cain, he may have spoken to Abel. But once again, there's a little question mark there. That's not in Scripture. Also not in Scripture, but could be assumed. God told people about sacrifices. How would they know about sacrifices, to do sacrifices? God had to have told them at some point about sacrifices. And so with those past experiences, then Abel brings a good sacrifice to God. He brought the best of what he had to God because he saw God as being the best, deserving of the best. Whereas Cain didn't. Cain brought whatever was left over, whatever he didn't need. Okay? So by faith, Abel brought a better offering than Cain. He was commended as righteous. In other words, he was in right standing with God when God spoke well of his offerings. By faith, Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. How does he do that? What?
His blood.
His blood. Yeah, his blood spoke from the ground to God. But also not just from the sacrifice he made in his blood, but the example he gave to us. He still speaks. The example he gave is you give your best to God. Okay. And I hope what you're seeing here is we're going to have past experience leads to faith, leads to future experience. I want you to kind of skipped over this in that first slide or second slide, anyway, that slide. But I want you to think about something. When you're doing a scientific experiment, right, the scientific method, you do experiments. Those are past experiences. And you come up with, okay, so this happened when I did this happened when I did this, etc. You then have faith that the next time you do that experiment, that new experiment, you're going to have the same thing. So this is not really any different than what we see with the scientific method. Some people think it is, but it isn't. All right. Get past Abel. Verse 5. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life, so he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. So let's look at Enoch real fast. Genesis 5. Thankfully, most of these references are in the first book of the Bible. It's fairly easy to find them. Genesis 5.
But doesn't that make sense since this is what they mean?
What?
Doesn't it make sense that all this is in Genesis because this is what they know?
Yes, it does. I'm just glad they didn't put Genesis in the middle of the Bible where it's harder to find it.
Really.
Yeah. All right, so Genesis 5, starting in verse 21. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. Everybody know who Methuselah is? The oldest guy in the Bible. Yeah. Noah's grandfather. And side note, if you do the math, Methuselah died the year of the flood.
I was just going to ask, you didn't get on the ark.
No,
That's what.
Did he die in the flood or die?
His death shall bring.
his death shall bring.
So people believe that Enoch had such a relationship with God that the Lord told him that if the death of his son is going to bring his wrath.
Okay.
which is also why has the longest lifespan. It
Yeah.
shows God's long suffering for man.
Very good. Yes. Good points.
Did Noah die in the flood or before the flood?
Methuselah?
Methuselah.
We don't know. He died the year of the flood. He may have died.
I don't think God would have taken him out.
He died at the same time as the.
Yeah.
You know, it's probably Methuselah's fault that of the flood because
Yeah.
you know what happens when you leave the water running in the bathtub.
Yeah, there you go.
So Enoch walked faithfully. By the way, for those of you who are new here, we are very strict and prim and proper. No jokes allowed. No, you'll find this group is just not that way. So Enoch walked faithfully with God 300 years. Can you imagine that? 300 years. And had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Enoch lived a total of 365 years. Enoch walked faithfully with God. Then he was no more because God took him away. Think about Elijah. God just swooped him up in this. This one day, Enoch was walking with God and they just kept on walking. There was no stopping. And his family goes, well, where did Enoch go? And God says, hey, I've got him up here. Don't worry about him. He's good. So Enoch lived for 300 years. So his past experience, he probably knew the testimony and witnesses about God. Those things that we read about Adam and Eve and the other people before Enoch because of the oral tradition. But he walked with God for 300 years. And he saw a lot. So the testimony of witnesses probably started him walking with God for 300 years. His future experience was he believed God existed and rewards those who seek him. So from this testimony of witnesses, from his walk with God, he believed, from the testimony of the witnesses, he believed that God existed and rewards those who seek him. Walking with God, he knows for sure that God exists and those who seek rewards those who seek him. And God took Enoch to be with him. So Enoch did have past experience, had 300 years of past experience with God before God finally took him. By faith, Enoch walked. And then the writer says, verse 6, Hebrews 11:6, and without faith, it is impossible to please God because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. And that's just common sense. How do you come to a God that you don't even believe exists? And why would you come to a God that you don't believe rewards those who seek him? So just common sense would tell you, if you in order to have faith in God, faith in what God is doing for you or through you, you have to believe God exists and that he has your best interest in mind. Okay. Here we go, Noah. By faith, verse 7, by faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. So, Noah in Genesis 6:9. Probably should have just held my hand in my finger in Genesis 5, then that'd be right where I need to be. Genesis 6, verse 9. This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. So, before there's ever God speaking to Noah, he had an experience with God. He was a descendant of Enoch. So, with Enoch being such a good example, I'm sure that Noah had talked to his ancestor at some point and understood about how good God is. And then Noah gets warned by God. So Noah gets warned by God after Noah follows God. Okay. So verse 10, chapter 6, verse 10 in Genesis. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways. So God said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I'm surely going to destroy both them and the earth. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood, make rooms in it and coat it with pitch inside and out. And then he gives instructions for how to make the ark. But God warns Noah. Now that's an experience you would want to have, right? You don't want to be on the outside of that one. But Noah didn't just say, oh, well, whatever, God. I'll get around to it one of these days. No, I imagine he went out and started hewing wood right then. So Noah builds his ark. That's the future experience that was to come. And then he ends up with, God has a covenant with Noah. In the end, after everything is done, God has a covenant with Noah that he will not destroy the earth again through water. Okay. And a covenant with his family. All right. Onward we go. All right. Chapter 11, verse 8. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By faith, well, we'll stop right there. So in verses 8 and 9, he starts talking about Abraham, the patriarch of Israel. He is called to a place he would later receive as an inheritance. So part of Abraham's past experience is God called him. God had direct communication with Abraham. And in Genesis 12, we see what that communication was. Verse 1, the Lord said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's house, your father's household, to the land I will show you. At this point, Abraham had already moved from Ur of the Chaldees over in Iraq or Iran, somewhere in there. He moved from there and had moved to Haran with his father and his nephew, his brother, and his brother. His brother died there. Now, Abraham was also married to Sarah at this point. So they had made a good life in Haran. And now God is saying, I want you to leave where you're comfortable, leave your family, and go to a place that I will show you, and I'll give it to you. To me, that'd be like God saying, okay, Philip, I want you to move to New York City. I'm not going to give you that because you don't want that, but I want you to move to New York City. That would scare me to death. I am used to Columbia's mostly calm, okay? I've been to New York City. I really don't want to live there. But if God called me, there would be a reason, and I would have to follow. But verse 2, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. This is the promise that Abraham gets. He is going to be a great nation. And at this point, he didn't have any children, and he was pretty old. So was Sarah. But I'm going to make you a great nation. Your name will be great. You'll be a blessing. I'm going to give you this land. So God called Abraham Now, the future experience, Abraham did go on to the promised land. If we keep reading in verse 4, so Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Lot was his nephew. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all the possessions they had accumulated and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. And so Abram didn't just sit there and say, oh, well, that's nice. I talked with God. He said these nice things about me, and then not do anything. Say, God told me to go there. Let's go. Verse 6, Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Morah at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he went on toward the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. Then Abram set out and continued toward the Negev. So what they're showing here is Abram starts out to the north part and he keeps moving further south. This is the land God is going to give him. And it was a custom at that time that if you were going to buy a property, you would walk the outskirts of the property before you bought it to show what you're getting. And that's what Abram is doing here. He is showing what God is giving to him. Okay. So his future experience, he did live in the land. He came in and he lived in the land with Lot and Sarai and Isaac and Jacob, his sons and grandson, even lived in the land for a while. So by faith, Abram. Chapter 11, verse 10. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. So once again, his past experience of talking with God, living in the promised land, he gets an heir in Isaac. And what does that make him want as a future experience? He looked for a land where he could live with God, a heavenly city, not just this land that God promised him here on earth. He wants a heavenly place where he can spend his time with God. And isn't that what we all should be looking for? I hate it when I lose where the cursor is. There we go. Modern technology. I don't think the Bible would have been written if it had been through modern technology. Satan has too much control on it. All right, verse 11. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was unable to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so, from this one man, and as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and as countless as the sand on the seashore. So, Sarah, Abraham's wife. Abraham was 75. At this point, Sarah would have been 60, I think, or no, 65. I think she was 10 years, no, 20 years younger than him. So she would have been 55 when everything started. But Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah 80 by the time God gave them Isaac. And they had tried to do things themselves. And that ended up with Ishmael, which caused all kinds of problems and is still causing problems today. But Sarah did believe. She laughed when God said, you're going to have a child in a year. Of course, we wouldn't. But God promised Abraham heirs. God promised a child to Sarah. That was the past experience. God directly talked to them and said, you are going to have a child. And so their future experience then was Sarah gave birth to Isaac, and they had numerous descendants. some of whom are reading this for the first time from the writer of Hebrews. Verse 13. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. So, all that these people experienced on earth, from Genesis, first chapter of Genesis, Adam and Eve, all the way through who he's mentioned so far, Abraham and Sarah. All these people were looking forward. They had experienced God in some way, and they had the promise of the Messiah and a new covenant was coming. They just didn't know it. They didn't even have the old covenant yet at this point. But all this was pointing towards a new covenant. So they were looking for a life with God, not just on earth. Like Abraham, they wanted an eternal city with God, a relationship with God, live with God. Which, in order to do that, you have to have the new covenant, sacrifice of Messiah that forgives sins, opening a relationship with God. That has been the whole brunt of the book of Hebrews. The old covenant is the past experience. The new covenant is this future experience we have because the old covenant pointed towards the new covenant. Okay. Any questions yet? Okay, I'm not seeing deer in headlights yet, but getting close.
So Abraham's experience with God was leave the land, I'll show you what you're going to inherit, basically. So he goes to Canaan,
Mhm.
walks it out.
Right. Yes.
So he did, in fact, have an experience with God, and God kept, he saw part of it.
Yes. Yes.
He did not see the nation.
He did not see the nation, and he did not see the inheritance of the land, actually. That would not come until under Joshua when they came and took the land.
Right, but he did see what it was gonna be.
Yes, he saw what it's going to be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Hundreds of years later.
Yes, the writer says these people had faith in God, even though they didn't see everything that God had promised come
but
to
the hope
fruition.
of that
The hope,
is me.
yes. And we today do not see everything God has promised. We see Jesus, but we don't see that completely intimate relationship we will have when we reach heaven. We're still looking for that heavenly city, that place with God. All right, verse 17. He just cannot leave Abraham alone. One more time. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son. Even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. And so, in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the death. From death. From the death. My tongue sometimes wakes up at like 10 o'clock. So we're good. So here the writer is referring to an incident that skeptics, critics will point to and say, how could God do that? That's child abuse, horrible child abuse. Well, if you read in Genesis 22, 1 through 19, we aren't going to read it. I'll just tell you about it. Before that time, Abraham is in a good relationship with God. But what we see as we look closely is Abraham is all about family. He is very protective of Sarah. He was very protective of Ishmael. He's very protective of Isaac. Everything is about his family. And so God says, let's test it. You bring Isaac up and sacrifice him. Now, people think, oh, Isaac, little bitty Isaac, how could you do that? Yeah, Isaac was old, at least a teenager. He was old enough and strong enough to be able to carry the wood for the fire. And that wasn't just a few little sticks and stone. No, this had to be enough wood to burn a whole animal. Okay. So he was old enough, and he was old enough to understand what they were doing. That, hey, Dad, we got the wood. We're going to do a sacrifice, right? Yes. We're missing something here. Where's the sacrifice? And what does Abraham say? God will provide.
Isaac had to have that faith too, because he was old enough to overpower his father.
Yes.
In one.
Isaac had to have faith as well.
Yeah.
And that becomes one of the things that is his experience. Now, the strange thing is that in Hebrews, the writer says Abraham knew that God would raise Isaac from the dead. He just had faith that that would happen. Why? Because God had already told Abraham that everything goes through Isaac. The promise goes through Isaac. And he knew God wasn't going to back down on that. And we can even see it as we read through chapter 22, Genesis 22. We see they had some servants with them. And Abraham says, okay, you guys stop here. My son and I are going to go up on the mountain. We're going to sacrifice, and then we'll come back. We will come back. Not I'll come back. We will come back. And you can say, well, he's probably just saying that so that they wouldn't suspect anything. But why would you say that? Because if you came back alone, that right there was going to give away what happened. There's no way, no reason to say we, unless you had this expectation that we were coming back. And so the writer, I believe the writer of Hebrews is definitely right on this. He knew that if Isaac died, he was coming back to life. So once again, Abram's past experience, God speaking, living in the land. The birth of Isaac was miraculous. This 80-year-old woman had a child. And he knew that God had fulfilled his promises all along. Isaac was the promised heir. God wasn't going to undo that. And so he goes and he offers Isaac. But just as he's raising the knife, the angel goes, whoa, whoa, stop. Hold it. No more. Put the knife down and walk away. Just as he's ready to offer Isaac, the angel stops him, and over in the thicket is a ram with his horns caught in the brush. That becomes the sacrifice. God did provide. By faith, Abraham. And verse 20, by faith, Isaac, they've just gone through this, blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. Okay, so Isaac obviously experienced God through Abraham. He answered, there was an answered prayer for children for Isaac. And then his future, they had twin boys. That's usually enough. So he had Jacob and Esau. Well, like his name was Ishmael. I thought, no, that's the wrong generation. Jacob and Esau. Esau was the older one. Jacob was the younger one. Jacob was more conniving than Esau was. In that culture, the older child, the older male, was supposed to get the inheritance and the blessing. But what happens when Isaac blesses the boys? Well, it's kind of subterfuge. First of all, Esau had already sold his birthright, the inheritance, to Jacob for some stew. But then Jacob cons his dad into blessing him, thinking he is Esau. And yet, God allows Jacob to be blessed. So Isaac blesses the boys. Now, why is that important? He is showing his faith for their future, because after Jacob gets done taking the big blessing, Esau comes in ready for a blessing, and he says, I've got nothing left, but I will go ahead and give you this. The faith in that is that these two will not kill each other tomorrow, that they will continue living on in the blessing that was given them. All right. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshiped as he leaned on the top of his staff. All right. So Jacob had a son named Joseph. We're all familiar with Joseph and his coat of many colors. He was the favored son. Joseph had two sons. And Jacob, as he was dying, he took his hands. Now, I told you the older gets the big blessing and the younger gets the lesser blessing. Joseph brought to Jacob's right hand the elder, which would be right. The right hand would be the greater blessing. He brought the younger son to the left hand. What does Jacob do? Cross his hands. Because in his faith, he saw this younger one over the elder. And it could be part of his experience too. Remember, he's the youngest son. But he crossed his hands. So Jacob had heard the experience of Abraham and Isaac. I mean, grandpa and dad had told him all this stuff. He experienced God himself. Remember, he is out in the wilderness and his brother Esau is coming towards him. And Jacob says, all right, you guys just take everything over there and I'll meet him by myself. You guys there, I want to give gifts, send a bunch of gifts to him. He's trying to make sure Esau doesn't kill him or his family. And he lays down in the desert, a rock for a pillow. I'm sure that was really comfortable. He has a rock for a pillow. And what does he see? Angels ascending and descending on a ladder. And he understands God is here. God is with me. How could Esau do anything for me, to me? And so that experience with God then allowed his future experience of blessing these people, saying, you children do have a future. God can bless you. God will bless you. Verse 22. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. So we're at the end of Genesis at this point. Joseph, who we just talked about having the two sons that Jacob blessed, he experienced God in many ways. As he is being sold into slavery by his brothers, God was with him during that time. God put him into a position of where he could interpret dreams, which then put him into a position of second only to Pharaoh in Egypt. So Joseph experienced God. Joseph had a strong relationship with God. His future experience then was toward the end of his life. Joseph speaks about the exodus in his bones. He believes God will save Israel. What is going on, some people think that Joseph was dead long before the people ended up in slavery. That's not true. They were already in slavery by the time Joseph was about to die, because we know that when Jacob died, Israel was allowed to go and bury him and then come back. And now we have Joseph saying, guys, when you leave, God will take you out of here. God will deliver you. You don't say that if everything is good and right. But they were already enslaved by that time. They could not leave Egypt. And so he says, God will God has promised. I know from my experiences. I know from the stories I've heard from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that God will bring us back into this land. And when he does, you take my bones with you. And they do. So Joseph has faith that God will save Israel. Verse 23. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. So, the slavery is going on. The Pharaoh sees that Israel is growing in number, and he wants to stop them. So he wants all of the male children to be killed. And he tells the midwives, you guys kill the children as they are born. The midwives don't do it. And Pharaoh goes, well, why aren't you doing that? I told you to do that. You should do that. And they said, we're sorry, King, but these people are really hardy. I mean, they've already given birth by the time we get there. They were lying, of course. But they saved the children. And because of that, God gave the midwives children of their own. We tend to miss that part of the story. They were blessed because of that. And so Moses' parents knew with the previous experiences with God, all this oral tradition back there through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, etc. And they may have witnessed the midwives being blessed, what they did, and how God blessed them. And so when the king decides, okay, that's not working, I'll just have all the mothers, when your male child is born, you throw them into the Nile. Drown them. So Moses' parents hid him from Pharaoh for 3 months. And then he got a little rambunctious, I guess. They couldn't do it anymore. Moses' mother did obey the Pharaoh. She put him in the Nile. He didn't say you couldn't build a little boat for you. Okay? So she put him in the Nile, and he was then, of course, adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. But Moses' parents, because they'd had this past experiences with God, in their future experience, they hid the child from Pharaoh. Verse 24. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who was invisible. By faith, he kept the Passover and the application of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land, but when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. So this is all about Moses' life. So Moses grows up and about 40 years old. He decides, I want to embrace my heritage. I am Hebrew. And he goes and he kills one of the Egyptians who was mistreating one of the slaves. That scares Moses after he does it, because he thinks, wait, Pharaoh's not going to like that. I'm going to be up for murder. I better run. So he runs. He goes into the wilderness for 40 years. During that time, Moses encountered God at the burning bush. Towards the end of this 40 years, Moses encounters God at the burning bush. And so God has him, God speaks to him. God performs miracles for Moses. Put your hand in your jacket, whatever you had. Pull it out, it's white, it's leprous. Put it back in, come back out, it's fine. Then the big one, all right, throw your staff down. It becomes a snake. Moses runs because he does not like snakes. Okay? But he picks it back up by the tail and it becomes a staff again. So God does some miracles for Moses' benefit. Moses goes, and then we have the encounters of God. He encountered God through the plagues on Egypt. All of Israel encountered that. They exodus from Egypt. So they get ready to go. They have the Passover, which is the last plague. All right. By faith, they put the blood on their doorposts. They crossed the Red Sea. Moses just stuck out the rod and the sea parted. So all these things, all these future experiences were based in faith because of all the past experiences they had with God. Verse 30, by faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. So Joshua takes over after Moses. God speaks with him, tells him, "You're good. I've got your back." He leads the people across the Jordan, and the Jordan dried up for them. Another miracle by God, past experience. And then that wasn't quite enough. Joshua's still a little timid, and God shows Joshua this heavenly army that is with him. And Joshua goes, "Well, okay, I think we can do this now."
Mhm.
So these past experiences, he then follows God's commands to walk around Jericho, and the walls fall because of God, not because of Joshua. But Joshua's faith was bolstered and created because of these past experiences he had had. And then verse 31, by faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. So Rahab, as you look in Joshua 2, she knew the stories of these people who are coming. She knew about the defeat of the Egyptians, the plagues. She knew about the defeat of the kings on the other side of the Jordan. She knew about the Jordan drying up. She knew this God was the powerful God, and she said, "I want to be a part of that instead of being destroyed." And so she saved the spies who came in, and then God saved her family as the walls fell. And she becomes a part of Jesus' heritage, as we find out in Matthew. Verse 32. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received their dead, raised to life again. There are others who were tortured, refusing to be released, so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and in holes in the ground. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. So he goes through this whole long list now. He doesn't have time or space to continue one by one. Goes through this whole list. They all experienced God in some way. This list is derived from not only scripture, but also oral tradition. Like Isaiah, it never says what happened to Isaiah, but oral tradition at that time said that he was sawn in two. Magic trick gone wrong. Okay. So between what we read here and what was held in the oral tradition, he says all these people experienced God, and all of them had a future experience. They all did something because they experienced God, and they were all looking for something future. So by faith, these people were looking at the old covenant. They showed us experience with God. The old covenant shows us experience with God. These people never saw the new covenant, but by faith, they knew it was coming. The new covenant gives us life with God. That is, once again, the whole message of this book. The old covenant is now past. It pointed to the new covenant, the experience we would have through Jesus. Hope for all. That's our motto, isn't it? So what is the object of that hope? Is the object us? No. It's Jesus. Yes, relationship with God. That is our hope. That is everyone's hope. So, does a hope consist of physical growth, fed by true spiritual growth, or are we like Abraham and Sarah trying to go through human means? In other words, Woodcrest right now is trying to look forward. What is coming? What does God have for us next? And are we going to use human means to do that? Or are we going to rely on God to lead us in the right direction? Does for all mean everyone, no matter their socioeconomic status, skin color, or original nationality? Or, like so many churches, are we looking for a specific socioeconomic class that can provide money to keep the doors open? Say, how can you say that? I can say that because I've been part of those churches. Do we want to hold on to people just because they can give a certain amount of money to the church? Are we really giving hope for all, for everyone? These are questions we need to ask as we try to move forward. Our past experience here should inform our future experience. And we have had good experience with God here. Not necessarily when we were at 2,500 people, but since then, we have had good experiences with God. We have grown stronger spiritually. God has provided miraculously. So what does this look like then? Where are we headed? Are we going to be hope for all? Point them to hope for all. So, Exposition Bible, once again, it is easier to see where God is leading when you know where God has been. And never has that been true than with this passage. Because where God has been was the past experience, and they could see where God was leading into their future experience because of that. Right? Thank you very much.